For the most wild yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad, indeed, would I be to expect it, in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad I am not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburthen my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world plainly, succinctly, and without comment a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many, they will seem less terrible than Baroque's. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace. Some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive, in the circumstances I detail with awe, nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. Thus begins the 1845 classic horror short story, The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. Now, this video will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the short story discussion playlist, but number two is the Edgar Allan Poe playlist. We are here right in the midst of October. There are at least 9 videos to be had about Edgar Allan Poe. Kind of working on something else. Maybe it'll pop up. Hopefully I get there. But yeah, so this is The Black Cat. We have a So What Happened portion, a Lit Crit portion, and a Writer's Corner portion of this video. So What Happened? Our speaker is an alcoholic, and he suffers from the drink. He is telling us at the beginning of this short story very clearly that, look, I'm pretty even-tempered, right? I'm a pretty good guy. You can trust me. I'm not crazy. I'm not mad. You can believe what I tell you. And then he tells us that this cat has single-handedly thrown him off the rails. He decides to gouge out its eye one night, and that's just the beginning of his murderous spree in this story. He then goes on to hang the cat, and he didn't mean to. You know, he didn't want to do that. He had to, really. He had to. It was something he had to do, but not to be outdone, not to be outclassed by reality itself. Sure enough, another cat shows up. Still, he's haunted by his first cat, but the second cat, just as big a beast as the first, has white fluff upon his chest. The first cat, pure black. This one, not as much. So the new cat bugs him miserably. And one day he's walking around, nearly trips over the cat and falls down the steps, decides, that's it, got to take the cat out. So he decides to kill the cat. His wife stops him. Thinking better of it, he decides, you know what? You're right. It's just time that I kill my wife. So he does. And then he walls her up. This seems to be a recurring theme with Edgar Allan Poe. This is just another of the... Edgar Allan Poe has a lot of stories that seem to be just greatest hits, right? He has paranoia, alcoholism, accidental murders, walling someone up. All of these things just come back time and again in his short stories. And the police show up, and he's showing them around. He says, look, these walls, they sure are solid. And he knocks out the piece of the wall that is right in front of his wife. So that is what happened. What are we talking about when we talk about The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. Well, the first little note there, so it starts. We have mentioned several times on this channel through this series so far the idea of a serial killer is relatively recent. It used to be thought that there are some people who are just mad. There's in Edgar Allan Poe's time, people would have been quote unquote mad. It is not until relatively recent that the idea of a serial killer and what it would be to constitute a serial killer has popped up. But several of his short stories, his being Edgar Allan Poe, have shown hallmarks of what are the building blocks to a serial killer. And here we have another one. We have here this speaker who is saying that, look, I just had to kill the cat. It was just the cat. Oftentimes, serial killers begin with animals. They work their way up to larger or more sentient animals. Sometimes they will start with mice, rats, things like this, before moving on to something that is more personable, a dog, a cat, etc. Maybe even making their way up to larger prey yet, a deer, etc. But this is more of a sacrificial kill than for hunting or sport or food. They are these people looking to do different things. And sure enough, in this short story, we have another of Edgar Allan Poe's speakers starting with some of this sort of serial killer type behavior. But these would, at least to my knowledge, would not have been common knowledge things in Edgar Allan Poe's day. So how did he intuit these little bits about being a serial killer? Now, the next thing that I want to look at is a quote ripped directly from the text itself. And it sort of plays into that same idea. The quote says, quote, "For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me," being the cat. "This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a certain sense of shame, and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not for some weeks strike or otherwise violently ill use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence, as from the breath of a pestilence." One of the things that we have oftentimes with these characters in Edgar Allan Poe's short stories is a backing into the ethos of the wretched, a backing into the philosophy or reasoning of something. So, sure, it's not his fault. This cat is just so odious. It is not his fault. The cat is itself, in fact, a pestilence. Surely you can forgive him for ridding the earth of some type of pestilence, can you not? It is a very interesting thing that we often see from people who are less than willing to accept responsibility for their own actions. I didn't know what was going on. I just felt this unstoppable force inside me. I had to kill that cat. It had to go. Don't you see it, don't you? So that and trying to justify his actions, and this sort of plays into the next point there. Please, I beg you. These characters are constantly making the case that they are sane. They are utterly sane. I'm not crazy. The crazy folks never know they're crazy. As someone who has spent a whole lot of time with homeless folk and homeless folk who have lost it, there's a point where you snap and you're gone, and really you might not be to blame for some of the things you do, but you have to be responsible for them nonetheless. So it is a weird thing to see manifest itself in people, this idea that I couldn't control it. And at what point does that become true? And I think that's part of the real horror here. This idea that at some point, maybe we're not in control of our own actions. What is free will? How many of your thoughts do you author? And how many simply take you? In fact, there's a good deal of evidence that the more self-controlled among us, that the more maybe intelligent among us, we are not coming up with, I'd say we as if I'm including myself, but these individuals who are ultimately creative, these individuals who are ultimately intelligent, these individuals who are actual movers and shakers. It is not that they have better ideas necessarily. It is that they are better able to filter the gunk that pops up in their brain. Being better able to filter the stupidity and randomness that pops up in their brain allows their consciousness to better concentrate on the idea or two that is a good one. And that is if you ask me, a very interesting theory of both intelligence, maybe, and maybe madness, but also the idea of self-control. Are the more successful among us simply those who are better able to control the self? Maybe. Maybe there's a good proponent, a massive amount of that success comes from being able to filter through the random gunk that pops up in your brain. I mean, think about it. What was the last, how often do you think you author your thoughts? And how many of your thoughts just come to you and you decide to ride that wave? It would be difficult, I think, to prove to yourself that you are authoring thoughts, and there have been many experiments done where they can locate the parts of the brain where from whence certain ideas spring, and a person will hit a button when they have a thought about food or sex or cars. They'll hit that button, but we have electrodes in their brain that show us a spark went off prior to them hitting that button. So this sort of or this I there is an eternal spring of thoughts inside us. Most of what meditation is basically telling all of that stuff to shut up. And you are constantly at the whim of those thoughts. Is intelligence, is self-control, is success just weeding out the ideas that don't need to be there, learning to tamp them down? That, I think, is an interesting thing to think about. Now, I wrote Telltale Heart down there because this short story, very similar to Telltale Heart. Instead of the old man, we have a black cat. Instead of the old man, we have a wife. So basically, I guess kind of instead of the nasty eye, we have the black cat. Instead of the old man, we have the wife. But it's kind of the same story. Only the Telltale Heart happened or was written 2 years before this short story. So is this Edgar Allan Poe going back to the well? Now, I have 2 notes in the writer's corner of this short story. This is a quote that we have about the black cat the first time around. The very first black cat that was killed because it bit our protagonist's hand. He inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. No, Eddie, he bit you. Don't say it like this. There's way more room in the writing to express yourself, to be an individual and individualistic writer. You don't have to say he inflicted a wound upon my hand with his teeth. You can say he bit me. The cat bit me. And then after that, you get to put in your own sort of coloring of the event. How was it that the protagonist reacted in immediacy? There's no reason to sort of cajole the words into this distant of a bastardization, I would say, of the English language. He inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. Why wouldn't you just say he bit you? Now, the last thing that I have here, we have made our way through several Edgar Allan Poe short stories this month so far. There are several more short stories yet in the Edgar Allan Poe playlist here on the channel. This was one of the more smoothly reading short stories, I would say, and I think a big part of that is that Edgar Allan Poe really proficiently used paragraphing in this short story. Many paragraphs, short paragraphs. This is one of the things that I think is underrated about an author like Chuck Palahniuk. Chuck Palahniuk has very short paragraphs, almost staccato, sort of bashing you in the head with short paragraphs, short sentences, sometimes single word paragraphs, let alone single word sentences. And it really adds to the readability of a text. It keeps us moving along the page. It's something that seems sort of elemental. It's something that seems maybe almost elementary. But it's something that I think is underutilized in capital L literature writ large. So that's all. That's all I have for this, The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. If you like or appreciate this sort of thing, hitting the like button really does help me out on the channel, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance, but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every week. There's poetry every Monday. I currently have a read-along going for The Dubliners, I guess, by James Joyce, and through the Finca Vigia edition of Ernest Hemingway, both of whom to which I will return shortly following October. There's also a read-along of Sylvia Plath's collected poetry. So yeah, there's all of those things. And oh yeah, Holly by Stephen King, the new Stephen King book. So if you might look forward to any of those things, consider hitting the subscribe button and sticking around for more, because I would appreciate having you back for the next one.